Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, well, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. It's amazing that we have reached the end of another year. And as the saying goes, I'm getting to know what it means now, that the days are long, but the years are short. I thought I was going to be very hard pressed to find enough albums to make a best of list of 2024. However, as I look back over the year and the albums that I have collected, I have found that I have many very good albums and actually a few great albums. The only rule on this list is that it needs to be an album that was released in the year 2024. Now, as previous lists, I will not rank them and do a countdown, but rather just tell you my favorite albums of 2024, those albums which made my best of list. However, at the end of the list, I will tell you which was my favorite album of 2024. As you know, I am an owner of music, meaning that I purchase the music that I love, and I own all the albums that I will be showing you. So, in no particular order, let's get started. First up is Sarah Jarosz, and she released an album earlier this year entitled Polaroid Lovers, and it is on the Rounder label. Sarah has always been one of my favorite Americana artists, and this album doesn't change that for me. This is her 7th studio album, and with this album, she does move a little bit towards the pop category. I think she may have a slightly wider audience with this album. However, it still stays within the Americana camp. Polaroid Lovers is a very easy album to recommend. It is quite easy on the ears, and I usually have no reservation on any album that Sarah Jarosz releases, and this is quite a good one. Next up is an album by Adrien Linker called Bright Future, and it is on the 4AD label. This is yet another solo album by the lead singer of Big Thief. This is a very stripped down album, sounding quite homey, and this album was cut direct to tape. As always, her style is that of folk music. It's very straightforward, and it does not have much adornment. Now, that's not to say that many of the songs aren't beautiful. They are. However, these songs are done with a lot of sparseness. You can see a lot of space between the singing and the instruments. One thing that I've noticed with Miss Linker is her style reminds me a lot of Bob Dylan in that her lyrics are very poetic in nature, and that for me is a huge compliment. So, second pick without much reservation, a fabulous, fabulous album, one that'll stick with you, Adrien Linker's album, Bright Future. Next up, we have Tbone Bernett. Yes, it's been 20 years, but he has finally released another solo album, and this one is called The Other Side on the Verb Forecast label. Many of you know Tbone Bernett by other work he's done for other artists in the field of production, and he is quite adept at that and has had a lot of success. However, he does have several solo albums, and they're usually quite good. This album is a combination of Americana, folk, and blues, and this is probably, if not the best, one of the best sounding albums I have heard all year. The sound quality is outstanding. One of the things about this album that I have noticed in the past about a few other albums is that it's as if you've heard all these songs before, and yet when you look, he wrote them all new. These are not remakes of old songs, although they do sound like them. And to me, that's usually a sign of a great album. The song construction and lyrics are first rate as well. The album features several guest appearances by a lot of his friends that he has met through producing them and being in the industry a long time. Those include Roseanne Cash, several songs with Lucius, as well as Way's Blood. If you want to listen to a really great Americana recording, this is one to get. Next up is one of my favorite artists. I probably own, if not all, almost all of the albums by this band, and that is Iron and Wine, which is Sam Beam. This album is called Light Verse, and it is on the Sub Pop label. This is Sam's 7th studio album, and this is his first studio album actually since 2017 with his previous release of Beast Epic. As always, you are usually swept away by the beautiful, breezy singing style that Sam brings to the table, but yet he makes beauty come out of songs that many times deal with sorrow. The album deals a lot with reflection, looking back on his life, people who have passed through his life, and he's wondering what has become of these people. I must admit I was truly surprised by this album in that I wasn't expecting this to be such a great album. In fact, most artists bring out their best work in their earlier part of their career, in their 20s and maybe 30s. Sam is well beyond that, and yet I think this is probably one of his best albums. And if you're an Iron and Wine fan or have never heard of them and want to take a listen to them and are curious, this is a great album to start with. Next up, we have an album that is re-released entitled Wild Woman by Lucius. However, the reason I'm including this album, it is a new recording session. Lucius is made up of the vocal duo of Jess Wolfe and Holly Lessig. And this is a indie pop album. However, the album has changed. Lucius wanted to go back in the studio and re-record this album. And the reason is that they felt these songs have matured over the past decade as they've performed them. They felt that there should be some new arrangements. And I love everything they've done. They even have a guest appearance on one of the songs with Brandi Carlile, a remarkable singer. If you haven't heard her before, most of you, I'm sure, out there know who she is. This is a truly remarkable album, and even though it came out originally in 2014, all the changes that have been done are worthwhile to give this album another listen, and this one comes with my highest recommendations. My next best of album is by John Moreland, and it's the album entitled Visitor, and it's on the Old Omens 30 Tiger label. This is a wonderful Americana folk album, which is rather sparse in nature in that it is basically made up of the beautiful melodic voice of John Moreland, as well as the mournful sound of his acoustic guitar. When you listen to the album, you'll notice its intimate feel, and that's due to the fact that it's basically vocal, guitar, and not much other acoustic instrumentation. In fact, John played almost all the instruments on this album, as well as recording this album on the couch in his home. So yes, it is quite homey sounding album. Give this album a listen, and I can guarantee you're going to come back and give this album many other listens. In fact, I think this is a almost masterpiece album. And I don't say that about many albums, and this is an album that has repeatedly shown up on my turntable, and I love it. I also use this album to relax in the evening, sometimes wearing headphones or earbuds, and really enjoying the music. And every time I listen to it, it brings out something new, something that I didn't notice was there before. So Visitor by John Moreland. If you don't know John Moreland and you love Americana and folk music, you need to check this album out. Next up is an artist who's been around for quite some time, and it's her album Shadow on the Lightyear label, and I'm speaking of none other than Liz Wright. As always, Liz is very hard to pin down as what genre she sings in. Is she jazz? Is she folk? Is she blues? Is she even pop sounding? And I say, yeah, she is all of those, depending on the song she is interpreting, done by others, or songs that she penned herself. In fact, on this album, she penned 5 of the 11 songs. The others are all covers, and she does a masterful job on all the songs on this album. And no matter what genre she's singing in, her voice is central to the music, and it is utterly captivating. She sings with great heart. And although this topic of this album deals with grief, it's still hopeful. It's got a positive end. It's not all feeling down in the dumps. So it's not maybe an uplifting album, but on the other hand, the music is sensational and it is forward-looking. So in that regard, yes, I do recommend this album, even if you're not looking for an album that deals with these topics. The band she uses is excellent, and the sound quality is equally excellent. And for an artist who's been around the block a few times, you can't do much better than the singing and the music of Liz Wright. Next up is the album Patterns in Repeat, and this is the 8th studio album for singer-songwriter Laura Marling. It is on the Chrysalis and Partisan record label. Miss Marling has always been one of my favorite artists. I don't think she puts out a bad album. There's always something that you can gain from listening to her albums. This album, due to the station of her life, is dealing with motherhood. She has a young child, and a lot of these songs have to do with her raising her daughter and relationships that she has with her husband as well as other close friends. This is a beautiful sounding album, and this probably is one of my favorite Laura Marling albums to ever come out, and it probably has some of the best singing of her career on this album. I'm guessing that the title, Patterns in Repeat, has to do with her motherhood, in that she doesn't mind repetition, doing the same things over and over on a daily basis for her daughter. This is part of motherhood, and she's learned to love this. And I think that is reflected very well in this album. So I have put Patterns on repeat in 2024. For those of you keeping track, we're on album number 9 on my best of list, and this is Underdressed at the Symphony by Faye Webster, and this is on the Secretly Canadian label. Now, Miss Webster is a very young artist. She is in the indie pop / folk category. I think from album to album, she sounds somewhat different, not a lot, but a little bit different. And this one, I think, leans slightly into the pop world, but not too much. So for those of you who don't love pop straight ahead, that's not this album, but it does have some pop elements. This is Miss Webster's 5th studio album. And she is a young artist, and like most young artists, she looks at what's happened in her life. And this album does just that. It looks upon what's happened with a failed relationship she recently went through. This album is quite interesting. Miss Webster uses her vocals rather ingeniously, I would say. In other words, they're short phrases that are slightly repetitive, but in a haunting way, which is good. And she sings and then sits back and lets the music take over. And so the empty spaces she's filling with her voice, and when she's done using her voice, the next empty space is filled with the music. And it works quite effectively on this album. When I first listened to this album, it is one that surprised me the most, but surprised me in a really good way. Of all the albums on my list, this is probably the one that would relate more towards a younger audience. And so I guess my music years are young, although my chronologic years are somewhat older. And finally, of all the albums that I am talking about today, this is one that sticks with me the most. I just seem to have the songs in my head all the time after every listen to the album. And now for the 10th and final best of selection I made is the album Tiger's Blood by Waxahachie, and it's on the Anti label. Waxahachie is Katie Crutchfield, and this is her 6th studio album. What's interesting here is that she doesn't try to expand her fan base by changing genres and being more appealing to others. I do think she does mature from album to album, and this album shows great maturity, and also it is really a remarkable album in not only the music, which is catchy, but more so in the lyrics and the way she's presenting them vocally. I think she did a masterful job in her singing technique in relation to the lyrics. Now, I wouldn't say that she is stagnant in just being Americana in her last several albums. Actually, she is refining her abilities from album to album. Katie is a great storyteller. Just listen to the song Right Back to It. I think you'll be hooked like I was after listening to that song. But the whole album is quite remarkable. I think it's her best work so far, and I'm really excited to see what Katie is going to do in the future. This is a real gem of an album. And I must say, I had one great day at the record store in that 3 of the albums on my best of list came from that day. And those were the Adrien Linker album, the Underdressed at the Symphony by Faye Webster, and this album by Waxahachie. Now, as an aside, talking about Waxahachie here, this is an EP she did back in 2018. So I'm not really reviewing it here, but I want to bring something up which I thought was very unique about this EP. And as you know, if you've listened to some of my past videos, I complain a lot. It's a pet peeve of mine about something to do with what they do to the albums that are released. And that is, I hate it that if you can't read easily, if you're looking at side A or side B or 1 or 2, whatever you may have it labeled as, but I find it so frustrating. And I've told you I came up with a solution. They should just have universal colors. Maybe red and white for side A and B, and black and blue for side C and D, and so on. So if you make it universal, just by knowing what the color is, you know what side you're looking on. Sometimes it's so difficult I end up looking at the dead wax. Now, the reason I talk about this album, I'm long-winded, is that I couldn't figure out what was side A or side B. I looked and looked on the label, nothing. I looked in the dead wax, Nothing that identifies this as side A or side B. But then I looked and I said, well, this EP has 6 songs on it, and there's 6 songs on each side. So what they did is this album has all 6 songs on both sides. So it doesn't matter which side you put it on, you're going to hear the same music. So I was quite amused with that, and I have never ever seen an album have the exact same songs on both sides. I think it's quite fun. And anyway, if any of you out there have seen a situation like that, I'd like to know, because I like these unique things that we find sometimes. Now, continuing on this train of thought, talking about the EP, there was an EP actually that came out in 2024, which didn't make my best of list, but was close, and that is Mood Ring by one of my favorite female singers, Joan Shelley, folk Americana singer, more probably in the folk genre. And this is 5 fantastic songs. Now, why didn't it appear on my best of list? Simply because it's an EP and it's only 5 songs. And I didn't think it was fair to compare 5 songs to a whole album that has 10 or more songs on it, where the artist spent more time in creating the album. So just because it was an EP, I left it off my best of list, but it's definitely a strong recommendation, and I put it on my honorable mention list. As I said, 2024 had a lot of great albums, and so I don't overlook some albums that I thought were great, or albums that you thought were excellent in this year and I didn't say them. I don't want you to be disappointed. So here's a list of honorable mention albums. First up is Ruth Moody, and this is the album Wanderer. And for those of you who may know the band, the Waylon Jennings, she is 1/3 of that band. And this is a wonderful album, also on the Americana folk genre. Next up is Jake Xerxes Fusel. The album is When I'm Called. After that, we have really a great band I've heard in the past. They have a really nice album called Oh Smokey, and that's Clem Snide. Came out not too long ago. And we had the return of Casey Musgraves with Deeper Well, a very fine album, much better than her previous release, which I was quite disappointed with, but this one pulls out all the stops and is definitely worth a listen. I'm sure you probably have heard a few of the songs that have been played on the radio. And here they are again, one of my favorites, Gillian Welch and Dave Rawlings, her husband, and this is Woodland's studio album, and yep, they recorded it in their now self-owned studio called Woodland. It's an old studio that they brought back to life. As all their albums, which are on the Aconey label, this is a first-class recording and a fantastic sounding album. In fact, I think Dave put this album out on reel-to-reel tape. For those of you out there who own a reel-to-reel player, I know there's probably about 100 titles out there you can buy. This is one of them, and this is quite a good album. Ray LaMontagne put an album out, Long Way Home, which was quite good. He had a duet, which was quite memorable on this album with Fiona Apple, of all people, and it works. Their voices actually meld very well together. And here they are again, one of my favorite singing duos, the Secret Sisters. They are the female equivalent of the Everly Brothers. And this album is entitled Mind, Men, Medicine. And they actually do a duet on this one with Ray LaMontagne, the artist I just spoke about. So there you go. There's another mini connection. Next up is the young artist Maggie Rogers. She puts out another great album. This is called Don't Forget Me, and I don't see how we can. It sounds great. Another very fine recording. To save a little time and not to forget anyone, I'm just going to read the last few from my list here. First up is John Smith, The Living Kind. You can see these albums over my shoulder. Phosphorescent doing Revelator. Katie Pruitt, Mantras. Sierra Farrell, Trail of Flowers, another great Americana album. And the great Ryan Adams, he's putting out, I think he's trying to do 10 albums in 2024. One of his early albums of the year, Star Sign, I really love that one. Unfortunately, that one is not available for purchase as far as physical media. You can only download this album. And actually, that topic I'm going to bring up in a future video, so stay tuned for that. Then we have Jessica Pratt, Here in the Pitch. I bet you some of you didn't think I was going to include her, but I did. And finally, an artist new to me that I did not know. Very interesting artist. She's sort of more of a world sound, but her band, she's called Vera Sola, and the album is entitled Peacemaker. Well, there you have it, my top 10 best of list, as well as a pretty lengthy honorable mention. I thought there were so many great albums this year, I didn't want to leave those albums out without at least a quick mention. As always, let me know what you think of my picks for the best of 2024, as well as any picks that you have that I may have overlooked. I'm always looking for great new artists. I just ask one thing before you make a comment on any album. Please make sure you've heard the entire album, not just one or two songs, and say I hate it or I love it. Please give the artist a chance and listen to the entire album. And now, I haven't done this in a long time. I'm going to show you an unknown album. So here it is, the unknown album for this video. Great. Hope you know that one. Let me know in the comment section if you know what that album is. As always, this is Alex with All About Albums. Thanks for listening. Have a great 2025, and remember, keep them spinning.